again. I'm Bob von Bargen, President Emeritus of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum. I want to thank you for following these serials on a weekly basis. If you enjoy them and want more of them, I encourage you to support the museum's Living History program with a contribution, no matter the amount, large or small. You can do this by going to the museum's website, afhmus.org, or by following the guidance at the end of the video. Thank you. In this serial, we will explore the patriotism and heroism of two men who never wore a military uniform. It was during the Second World War. The nation was encountering tough times. Pearl Harbor had been attacked by the Japanese, and Nazi Germany had declared war on the United States. The nation was grossly unprepared for war, and in those early days of the war, events did not bode well for us. Armies had to be trained, industries had to be mobilized. Initially there was a fear that Hawaii would be invaded, and for a time there was that the West Coast appeared to be imperiled. Public and motivation to support the war effort was high and moving in high gear. Selective service was enacted, and emotions ran high. Some might go so far as to call it hysteria. Conscientious objectors were vilified. They were called cowards and yellow bellies. But these men did not run away. They stayed and served in alternate service. This is their story. It's a story of patriotism and love of country. Today we will hear from Neil Hartman. Next week, Warren Sawyer will tell you about his experiences. We are honored to have this serial introduced by Larry Van Meter.
I'm Larry Van Meter. I'm the head at Morristown Friends School in Morristown, New Jersey. The wartime experiences of Warren Sawyer and Neil Hartman remind us that heroism takes many forms. As conscientious objectors, their experience was different from that of the soldiers serving on the front lines during World War II. But what they did required great courage and fortitude. I've known Warren and Neil all my life. As a child growing up, I knew them as quiet leaders in our local friends meeting here in Morristown, New Jersey. Later, I got to know Neil as a teacher and Warren as a family friend. The Religious Society of Friends, which is the more formal name for Quakerism, is a Christian denomination that believes deeply in equality and nonviolence. Quakers typically are pacifists, and the selective service system that guided millions of young men through the draft process during World War II had provisions for those with religious objections to serving in the armed forces. Instead, they were required to perform alternative service in a non-combatant setting. But the service they provided was anything but easy. Warren tells of the difficult work he did at the Byberry State Hospital in Pennsylvania, and Neil tells of volunteering to be injected with a terrible disease in an effort to enhance medical science. Their stories are important, but are also little known. An important chapter in our nation's history that illustrates that in a pluralistic society, at least within limits, the nation can make room for people with religious convictions that differ from official government policy.
And how'd you become a Quaker?
In 1939, my sister went to a Quaker work camp in Philadelphia, and I'm sorry I never really asked her how she found out about it or how she did, but she persuaded me in 1940, the next year, to sign up for a Quaker work camp in Michigan, which I did. That was the first time I really had anything to do with Quakers. You didn't have to sign up for the draft until you were 21. I was only 20, but I knew it was coming.
Okay, so you're drafted, and then what happens?
I had taught 1 year in Marysville, Ohio, and I resigned in August because I knew I was going to be drafted. I didn't think it was fair to start teaching in September when you knew you'd be drafted.
How did you get to Byberry?
I went to Miriam, Indiana in April, and in September we all got a letter asking us if we would volunteer for Byberry. But if I went to Byberry, the state of Pennsylvania would pay for my room and board. I would learn something about mental health that I knew nothing about. And so for all those reasons, I wouldn't have to pay the $30. I'd learn about mental health, and the climate would be better. So I volunteered. After I volunteered for Byberry, I got a letter from Charles Zeller, the superintendent of Byberry, asking if I would be interested in volunteering as a human guinea pig for hepatitis. This was the worst disease of World War II for the American Army. And incidentally, they were actually giving the disease to the soldiers because the yellow fever vaccine they were using for the soldiers was not pure enough, so it contained hepatitis virus. As soon as they found that out, of course, they cracked down on where you could get the yellow fever vaccine. You had to go to New York to get it. And also they started this experiment in the University of Pennsylvania with a major of the Army, Dr. Neath, in charge of the experiment to find out how to cure hepatitis.
What did this involve?
I spent 4 days a week working at Byberry as attendant, and 2 days a week I had to go to downtown to the University of Pennsylvania to have them take blood. Of course, they took blood first and found out my levels. Then they inoculated me with dirty blood. Dirty blood was blood that had come from a person who had hepatitis. And I had an incubation period of about 60 days, I think.
What happened as a result of being inoculated with this contaminated blood?
I said we went down there twice a week for these tests. When I went down there once, I said, "Hey, last week you were sick." It was so mild that I didn't know it, but the blood showed up that I'd had hepatitis. We had two kinds of hepatitis. We called them serum and infectious. They now call them A and B. We didn't have C then. And what I had was serum hepatitis, came from dirty blood, and it was very, very mild. But after I had a few weeks rest from that, then they asked me to take a drink of dirty water. Dirty water was contaminated with sewage. And about 60 days after that, I woke up in the middle of the night shaking my bed, and I knew I had hepatitis. And they immediately put me in the infirmary in the University of Pennsylvania.
When this was over, they did other tests. You understand they had a biopsy?
5 of us had both kinds of hepatitis, and they persuaded us to let them take a biopsy of our livers to prove that we'd come back to normal. I wanted the general anesthesia, but they talked me out of general anesthesia because they said there's a slight risk there. And since we were volunteers, they didn't want anything happening to us. When they cut me open, I felt a very, very sharp pain. This is Dr. C. Everett Coop who was doing the surgery. And I thought, Coop, you lied to me. But when they were taking the blanket off after the operation, they said, "Oh, look, we stuck him in a safety pin." So I really felt better that he hadn't lied to me.
This is Dr. C. Everett Koop, who became the Surgeon General.
That's correct. He was interning at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and the University of Pennsylvania Hospital.
Neil, these are tests that could have taken your life. Why did you do this?
Well, of course, we got called all kinds of things, yellow bellies, and they said they could see a streak down their back. So I wanted to show that I was willing to take risks with my life. I was not willing to take risks with somebody else's life. So I was really thankful that I had this opportunity to show that maybe I wasn't a yellow belly after all.
Your career after the war, what did you do?
After I was released from the draft, I decided rather than leave the profession of teaching, I'd try a Quaker camp. Since I came to Philadelphia, then I found out for the first time that Quakers had schools, and one was George School, which is in Bucks County. So I applied at George School and got accepted, and I was very, very happy there.
And how'd you get here to New Jersey?
I married the secretary at George School and taught there for 2 years. One of the wives of the teacher worked for the American Friends Service Committee, named Lorraine Cleveland, and she asked me if I'd be interested in going to Japan to do relief work, and I thought that's a good place to have a honeymoon. So my wife and I went to Japan for 3 years, running a neighborhood center in Tokyo. And when I came back, George School didn't have a vacancy. So I went to the Friends Council on Education in Philadelphia, and they sent me to Morristown. And I got hired at Morristown and taught there 33 years.
Wow. Well, Neil, the nation is fortunate to have men like you. You had the strength of character to maintain your integrity and your conviction. Patriotism comes in many shades. Neil, you're a great American, and I'm proud to know you. Wow. Could you do what Neil did? Would you risk your life as a human guinea pig to prove your love of country? This is all unimaginable by today's standards. But the frenzy of war drove this medical research back then. Regrettably, it happened on a broad scale, all to win the war against totalitarianism. Join me next week to learn about the experiences of another conscientious objector, Warren Sawyer. He will relate his experiences while serving in alternative service, all to prove his loyalty to a skeptical public.